Welcome to our second podcast on federalism. In this podcast, we will be looking specifically at intergovernmental relations today and understanding federalism. There are two learning objectives for this podcast. The first learning objective is characterize the shift from dual to cooperative federalism and the role of fiscal federalism in intergovernmental relations today. The second learning objective is assess the impact of federalism on democratic government and the scope of government. Let's begin by looking at intergovernmental relations today. This refers to interactions among national, state, and local governments. There are over 89,000 governments in the United States. One national government, 50 state governments, and many other local governments and school districts and special districts. You'll see in this chart how it is broken down. When discussing intergovernmental relations today, we must focus on three important features. First, the gradual change from dual federalism to cooperative federalism. Second, federal grants and aid as a cornerstone of the relationship between the national government and state governments. And third, the relative growth of the national government and state governments. One way to understand the changes in American federalism is to contrast dual federalism with cooperative federalism. Before the national government began to assume a position of dominance, the American system leaned towards dual federalism, a system under which states and the national government each remain supreme within their own spheres. The analogy of layered cake federalism is often used to describe dual federalism because the powers and policy assignments of the layers of government are distinct, as in a layer cake. And proponents of dual federalism believe that the powers of the national government should be interpreted narrowly. Dual federalism looks like a layered cake. The national government took a direct interest in economic affairs from the very founding of the Republic. As the United States changed from an agricultural to an industrial nation, new problems arose, and with them new demands for governmental actions. The United States moved from a system of dual federalism to one of cooperative federalism, in which the national and state governments share responsibility for public policies. Using the analogy of marble cake federalism, American federalism is portrayed as a system with mingled responsibilities and blurred distinctions between the levels of government. Cooperative federalism, which may be seen as a partnership between the national and state governments, began in earnest with the transformation of public attitudes toward the role of the national government during the Great Depression of the 1930s. For hundreds of programs, cooperative federalism involves shared cost, federal guidelines, and shared administration. Notice the picture again, and you can see cooperative federalism as a marble cake. Ronald Reagan believed that most policy responsibilities should be left to the states. Reagan opposed federal spending on domestic policies and reduced grants to state and local governments. When the Republicans won Congress in 1994, they placed an emphasis on devolution, the transfer of responsibility for policies from the federal government to the state and local governments. However, since the mid-1990s, Republicans have adopted a pragmatic approach to federalism to accomplish their goals. Several Republican policies now attempt to restrict state power. Americans tend to embrace a pragmatic view of governmental responsibility. Fiscal federalism involves the pattern of spending, taxing, and providing grants in the federal system. Grants and aid are the main instrument the national government uses to both aid and influence states and localities. Federal aid amounted to about $484 billion in 2010. Categorical grants can be used only for specific purposes or categories of state and local spending. State and local agencies can obtain categorical grants only by meeting certain qualifications and by applying for the grants. Much federal regulation is accomplished by strings that are attached to categorical grants, such as non-discrimination provisions. The most common type of categorical grant is a project grant, awarded on the basis of competitive applications. Formula grants are distributed according to a formula based on factors such as population, per capita income, and percentage of rural population. Complaints about the cumbersome paperwork and the numerous federal requirements attached to categorical grants led to the adoption of block grants. Congress implemented block grants to support broad programs in areas such as community development and social services. Block grants provide more flexibility, since states and communities have discretion in deciding how to spend the money. The percentage of federal aid to state and local governments in the form of block grants began increasing in 1995 as the new Republican majority in Congress passed more federal aid in the form of block grants, including grants for welfare programs. In recent years, states have been burdened by underfunded mandates and unfunded mandates. Underfunded mandate means that the states have to budget more funds for the project in order to receive federal grant money. Unfunded mandates are of even greater concerns to the states. These require state and local governments to spend money to comply with laws such as the Clean Air Act of 1970 and the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, with no financial help from the federal government that enacted the laws. In addition, federal courts create unfunded mandates for states regarding school segregation, prison construction, and other policies. In 1995, Congress passed a law that will make it more difficult for Congress to impose new unfunded mandates. Understanding federalism. Federalism was instituted largely to enhance democracy in America, and it strengthens democratic government in many ways. Different levels of government provide more opportunities for participation in politics and increase access to government. Some different citizens and interest groups will have access to different levels. Federalism also increases the opportunity for government to be responsive to the demands for policies. Moreover, it is possible for the diversity of opinion within the country to be reflected in the different public policies among the states. Different economic interests are concentrated in different states, and the federal system ensures that each state can establish a power base to promote its interest. By handling most disputes over policy at the state and local level, federalism also reduces decision-making and conflict at the national level. Conversely, diverse state policies and the large number of local governments also create some impediments to democracy. Since the states differ in the resources they devote to services like public education, the quality of such services varies greatly from one state to another. Diversity in policy can also discourage states from providing services that would otherwise be available. States are deterred from providing generous benefits to those in need when benefits attract poor people from states with lower benefits. Federalism may have a negative effect on democracy when local interests are able to thwart national majority support of certain policies, and having so many governments make it difficult for many Americans to know which government is responsible for certain functions. While the national government has grown in scope relative to state governments, it has not done so at the expense of state governments. The latter continue to carry out all the functions they have typically performed. The national government has instead grown as it has taken on new responsibilities viewed as important by the government. In this podcast, we looked at intergovernmental relations today and understanding federalism. The learning objectives were 1. Characterize the shift from dual to cooperative federalism and the role of fiscal federalism in intergovernmental relations today. 2. Assess the impact of federalism on democratic government and the scope of government. Our next podcast will be on public opinion and political action. Thank you for listening.